So, have you ever wondered what your purpose is in life? Have you ever wondered what your life could be like if you found greater purpose within yourself? If so, please join us today on this episode. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Interfaith Conversations. I'm Matthew McKnight, your host. Here at Interfaith Conversations, we connect with each other's faith and beliefs. On today's episode, I sit down with one of the world's greatest experts on how to find and live life with purpose. Dr. Robert E. Quinn, who goes by Bob by those who know him, spent decades researching how people the world over can learn how to find purpose in order to live happier and more impactful lives. Whether you are someone of faith, of no faith, or somewhere in between, each of you will find something meaningful from both parts of this episode. So without further ado, let's head over to the interview. Well, President Quinn, welcome to Interfaith Conversations with us today.
Glad to be here.
So I want to introduce President Quinn to everybody. I call him President Quinn because it's the only way I know to describe who he is in my life. What I want to do here at the beginning is just share a little bio for people to get to know Bob Quinn. President Quinn was a professor for his entire career studying change. He has spent the last 40 years doing research, publishing, teaching, consulting, speaking to more than half the Fortune 500 companies. He is one of the leaders in the field of positive organizational scholarship and a founder of the Center for Positive Organizations at the University of Michigan. And at one point in his career, he accepted the call to serve as a mission president for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Australia from 2007 to 2009, which is how I know him. He is the father of 6 children and 17 grandchildren. He continues to serve his community and his family, and he is one of the greatest men I have ever known. How's that for an introduction? Well, President, as we begin this conversation, I just wanted to frame the discussion here real quick. So, in the 21st century, religion has shifted quite a bit. According to the Pew Research Center, 24% of the global population considers themselves religiously unaffiliated. Another global fact is that Islam is the fastest growing religion, primarily due to the birth rates in Muslim-majority countries, while Christianity is growing at a slower pace on average globally. The share of unaffiliated people in North America grew from 17% in 2010 to 30% in 2020, so almost a doubling. And in the US alone, between 25 and 30% of millennials and Gen Z who grew up in a religion consider themselves not affiliated with any religion anymore. Sometimes people call them the nuns. I don't necessarily prefer to use that term, but the other thing is that we also live in a rapidly changing world where technology rules. Things like the internet, social media, handheld smart devices, and even discussions about how AI will impact people, including how AI will shape religion. So, in considering these trends, why does religion still matter in the 21st century?
I think that when I think about these things, I think about sitting on the beach and watching the waves come in and go out. All those statistics that you just quoted are very accurate, and they represent a movement now, moving of the waves. In the last few months, we're seeing reports of a renewed spiritual interest or religious interest in all the churches, right? I think all the churches, or certainly a lot of them. And you say, well, wait a minute. Given the trend that we've watched for 5-10 years, maybe more, what does this mean? And it seems to be very real. We're seeing just a lot of people joining churches, people getting involved in churches. I think that there's a deep human need for meaning in our lives. I think that we saw a great unanchoring from maybe previous to the turn of the century, but through the whole first part of this century, um, and a turn towards secularism and logic, um, and it really makes making sense of traditional religion very hard, and we've seen people leave those patterns in droves. I think sometimes when that swing of the pendulum keeps going and we hit true deep uncertainty, people suddenly start acting on that hunger. I'll give you an example from 1941.
Sure.
I served a mission as a young man, and my mission president had served his mission in 1941. He was in Hawaii on the day of the attack on Pearl Harbor. He said the next Sunday was an amazing experience to him. He said every church on the island of Oahu was packed, the windows were open, and people surrounded the buildings trying to hear the sermon. Now, on that Sunday, they still didn't know if the Japanese fleet was still there, if there was another attack. They were in total uncertainty. And I think there's a foxhole kind of mentality where, when they say there are no atheists in foxholes, I think there are times in our lives when crisis comes and we deeply, deeply have that yearning. And I think that where we are today in society, the whole world is shaking. Things are crumbling everywhere. I think the tide is starting to turn. I think the wave is starting to turn. Will it continue? I don't know. But I think there are large subsets of people now starting to say, I've got to find something. And they're more open. And so suddenly people are streaming back into the churches. How long it'll last, I don't know.
The word I picked up that you said there was hunger, a sense of hunger. The other thing I would add that it seems to be big here in this space is the feeling of uncertainty. And the fact that today, because there's not strict social categories in a lot of ways, wanting to be on some type of level ground, I think, is something that people are deeply searching for in what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I'd go back to the foxhole mentality. When I was a little boy, one day my parents went out, left me alone at home. And I thought, this would be a great day to build a bomb. So I went to the garbage can and got a bottle and cleaned it out. I went to the medicine cabinet and I filled it with fizzy powders, put water in there, put a cap on it, started to boil water and put the bottle in the pan of water. Well, an absolutely shocking thing happened. The bomb went off. All the boiling water went all over me. Now, I'm a little kid, I'm at home, and I'm deeply burned, right, by that boiling water. And I had no religious training, but I immediately fell on my knees and began to beg for help. And the strangest thing happened. This very clear voice in my head said, call Mrs. So-and-so, one of our neighbors. She will come and help you. So as best I could, I dialed the phone. This woman showed up immediately. She had medicines. She took care of me. When that was over, I was 10 or 11, I was asking myself, what in the world was that all about? What happened? But more importantly is, why did I fall on my knees? I was not much of a believer. But when you strip away the things you started to talk about just a minute ago, in terms of how other people see us, how we look, etc., and in a very secularized world, you may feel very fearful about saying, I go to church, right? Because you can't, you got to defend it somehow. But when you strip away those social expectations and you get back to that core hunger for a variety of reasons, whether it's crisis or something else, Uh, when that moment comes, we look for something greater than us, and often we find it.
I think what's interesting is that there's this notion that certain people get things from religion or some type of faith tradition, and others say, well, it's just not my thing, or I just don't connect there. But what you're sharing is that, even when people are in desperate situations or they want to understand how they fit into basically this big world, this big cosmos, there's this deep longing for belonging.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of, basically there's four needs. We need to feel safe. We need to feel competent. We need to feel that we belong. And we need to feel that we're growing, contributing, and having meaning. And when we lack one of those four things, it puts us in crisis. And so people in tradition, when they say, religion's not for me, I can understand there's 100 reasons why that can be true. At the same time, we have lots of people saying, well, I don't believe in religion, but I believe in spirituality.
Right.
And, what are they saying when they say that? Well, some of those needs, I think, are getting met by that pursuit of spirituality. That then takes us back to the churches and asks, what did it, as an organization, what's your product? What are are people lining up on Sunday morning to get into your church? Now, I know a bakery in a little tiny town where people travel 50, 60 miles to go to that bakery to buy donuts. They line up at 5 in the morning, right? Now, in that 50-mile radius, there's 100 bakeries, but they don't line up at the other bakeries. What is that bakery doing that causes customers to line up at 5 o'clock in the morning? Well, our first answer is we don't know. But if we think about it, we do know. That bakery's different than the other bakeries. The people who run it are running it differently. They're buying a higher quality of ingredient. Their discipline in making those products is greater. When people walk into that bakery, they get greeted with love, right? They buy that donut or whatever it is, and they feel like they're getting great value for that money they're spending. Now, if we say, are the people lining up in front of your church at 5 in the morning? Everybody would laugh. But that nevertheless leads to a really important question. What is our product? And what is it that would cause people to come to us lining up at the door, fighting to get in? And I think there's an answer to that question. The answer to that question is you're meeting my need for spirituality, for safety, competence, belonging, and growth, my sense of awe, my connection to something bigger than myself, in a way that I can see, appreciate, and value, and that I want more of. I want more of this product. Well, that asks the question, regardless of what faith tradition it is. That's a leadership question. That's a spirituality question. Are we creating a community that is providing that product that people so value they break the door down to get in? And I think the unfortunate answer, although there's actually research on this. I remember when we were in Australia, a guy called me. He was working on his dissertation, and he was studying this very thing. Why do churches live or die? So he was looking at the vitality of churches. And his answer was intensity of spirit. If there's an intense living spirit in a congregation, it grows. And if it becomes bureaucratized and conflicted, it dies. So people stop coming. That's a really interesting image to think about, right? So it becomes a system that's attractive to the people outside of the system. And that challenges us to create communities that are really serving the needs of, quote, the customer.
Yeah, and this idea that religious traditions have this balance where they themselves are rooted in some history. They're rooted
That's
in a
right.
space in time, and yet at the same time they're always recreating their community. And that it comes back to the people involved in that process that really is what makes that change for people.
Yeah, let's translate that to something I think that everybody could eventually understand. And that is, let's stop talking about congregations and let's talk about conversations. We have hundreds and hundreds of conversations in a week. The majority of those conversations are normal, conventional conversations. How's the weather? Oh, it's good. How's it? And we go on to the next person. That's a normal conversation. So if we ask the question, what does an absolutely great conversation look like? I've asked that to thousands of people. They never know the answer until they sit down for 2 minutes and really think about it. And then they all have the answers. And the answers are, oh, the trust is really high. People are saying what they really feel. People are respectful. People are building on what each other says. It becomes synergistic. That is, it's growing. The conversation itself is growing to another level. And we're all being enlightened. We're being illuminated by what we're co-creating. So that conversation is being co-created in real time. It's emerging, but it's changing the people participating in it. Well, that's a very different social system than the other conversations we have all week long. And the question is, well, is that by accident? Most people believe it is. If I have a great conversation, it was a happy accident. Now, the question is, can we change the probabilities? Can we behave in ways that cause more great conversations to happen in our life in the course of a week? If we do, we greatly increase the quality of our life. Well, the same thing applies to any given church and any given tradition. Can we create a setting where great conversations are happening in various forms, even the talks, and that they're life-giving and that everybody's growing? Now, let me just tie that to the research of Barbara Fredrickson, who's a good friend of mine. Barb turned psychology upside down by showing that positive emotions matter. Up until her research, people believed that positive emotions didn't matter. The only ones that mattered were negative emotions. And what she showed was when we have positive emotions, learning increases, discourse becomes richer, we grow more, and in that process, we gather resources. When you and I have a great conversation on a podcast, we leave the podcast, but I don't stop thinking about you and our conversation because I learned so many things in that hour. And I'm still there. I'm still learning from them, right? So she introduced those notions, and then she went on to study love. Well, when a scientist studies love, they've got to define it somehow, and that's not going to be a Hollywood definition. And she worked very hard to find the definition. The definition was so interesting. Love happens in micro moments, and it involves me giving you positive energy and you giving me positive energy. And that is the essence of love. I'll give you an example. I was at a beach house with my extended family, and my son wanted to have a spiritual family gathering. So we got up real early. We had this spiritual gathering, and it was really good. It was really impactful. When it was over, my wife and I went for a walk along the ocean edge, which we had done each morning that week. Now, when the sun's coming up and it's early and people, people, not a lot, but steady stream of people walking the beach. And the previous days, we said, we would nod our head or say hello. Someone said hello. On this day, we're walking down and my wife is saying to people, how are you? Good to see you. And they're looking at her like she's crazy. crazy. Some are stopping responding. I'm watching her. I'm feeling what we just felt in that spiritual gathering. And I start doing the same thing. Like two crazy people coming down the beach. We're injecting positive energy in people. And some are just disoriented by it. Others were very responsive. We finally came to a man who was picking up shiny stones. And my wife says, "That's beautiful. What are you doing?" Now, because of the way she asked, the energy she's injecting, the guy was totally at ease, open, and he began to pour out his story about why he gathers the stones and what he does with them, and he was just so happy, right? The two of us that morning were walking the beach, injecting people with positive energy, with love. They didn't earn it. They didn't buy it. We weren't in a social contract. We were just giving it to them because we were full of it. Now, I would suggest that if you look at your own marriage, relationship with the kids, relationships at work or at church, that giving of energy is what makes a social network vibrant, whether it's a conversation, a team at work, or a group at the church, right? And when we talk about God being in a group, and we say, wow, the Spirit of God was really in that group meeting last night. And you say, okay, well, what does that mean? People will give you answers. The answers are very similar to what is a great conversation, right? The Spirit of God, the power of God unified us and energized us. And we began to learn things at a higher rate than we normally were in them. We were being illuminated, right? And we were being filled with positive emotions, and we were full with love. And so I think everybody yearns for that at work, at church, at home. And very few people get it, but they don't know how to ask for it or look for it.
I hope that's kind of one of the things that people find meaningful is coming on the podcast and be able to see what are ways people can talk across differences and have that opportunity to have those type of meaningful conversations with each other, especially with people, like you said, you may not know them very well or even their background, but once you've crossed a bridge or two, you know how to do it again. Right.
Yeah,
and the more
right.
often you cross those bridges, the more comfortable you are being over the chasm of uncertainty. Right. And so finding those ways, I think, really can mean a lot to people. You made me think of a story about this idea of desperate. I want to take us to a different war zone, a little bit more current. So my wife served as a missionary in Ukraine and spent time there when Russia invaded Crimea. And she talked about how when she went to serve other people and she would go out and talk to people about the light that the missionaries would bring, for years have been used to people from outside their culture coming in and telling them how they need to live. Or their own society saying that I need to trap myself in my own emotion and not share it with a stranger because I'll be hurt. Again, back to that conversations you talked about. And what she said was interesting is that after Russia invaded Crimea, there was a whole host of people willing to discuss religion and belief and be more vulnerable and be more open because of that. And I think that's what's interesting is because I have talked to a lot of people about, faith and tradition. And often they talk about how, well, I don't understand that there could be a God or a divine or something supernatural beyond ourselves because there's too much suffering in this world. And while I don't have answers for all suffering, and there is immense human suffering, what I have seen is because there's human suffering and because we struggle, it makes us have to seek out and earnestly desire for more, one is for comfort, it's just for that basic need, but also for depth of understanding of your own place and purpose in life. And so even in difficulty, I guess my point here is even in difficulty is where strong, thriving conversations can happen. And if done the right way and done repeatedly in a positive way, like you're saying, can lead to extraordinary results through that conversation.
Yeah, I think what you said is so important. Let's kind of break that down. All of that, if you take the story of those people being closed to her message, the reason you gave for it was fear, right? When the Iron Curtain went down, I went over to Hungary right after and did a workshop, and it was the stiffest group of people I ever met with. They distrusted, they would not even move their chairs into a circle. They wouldn't talk to each other. They were so traumatized by the KGB that even though the KGB was gone, they were carrying all these cultural artifacts. Now, what is the emotional center of what they're carrying? It's fear. Fear is a primary emotion. We feel it all the time. We never admit to it because that's undiscussable. For example, there's a researcher at the University of Virginia who measures professional fear, and he has these types of fear, and he says to executives, how often do you think you feel this at work? And they say, 2% of the time. He says, okay, let's look at the measures, and he puts up the numbers. 61%, 59, 67. That is, they're feeling fear all the time at work, but they never admit to it. Every time there's any kind of disruption, if I hear a loud noise outside my window, I feel fear. If someone raises their eyebrow in the middle of something I'm saying, I say, oh no, they disagree. I feel fear. Fear is an incredibly present. Fear and anger sort of go together. They're always there. And what that research on love says, or what the Boredom and Build theory says, when those negative emotions are present, you shut down. You don't trust the other person because you're injured and you're traumatized, etc. So why would I trust your wife when I'm feeling those things? Now, there's two things that change those common patterns. One is crisis. If things got even worse, if suddenly I have a bomb go off and boiling water is burning me, or if the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor, or if Russia attacks, it gets so bad, the crisis is so great, I know I don't have the answers. I become humble. I become open to other people. And that's what happened to your wife. The other path is much less frequent. The alternative to crisis is purpose. If I have a purpose that's bigger than me, but I'm absolutely committed to it, I'm willing to do things that my ego is normally not willing to do. So I leave the conventional paths in search of learning in order to realize my purpose. And the research is very, very sound about that, very, very comprehensive. Purpose-driven people reap a long, long list of beneficial life outcomes that other people don't get. Most people are not purpose-driven. Most people are reactive. They're acted upon. And they are not cutting their own path. They're responding to the social stimuli around them. Most people are living in fear, anger, and other negative emotions. So they're not growing, right? So it becomes kind of a vicious cycle. But what you're describing, I think, is absolutely accurate.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes me think you were talking about choosing a life of purpose and not having to allow crises to be the only way in which you change in a positive direction. I think one of the things that helps me and other people I've talked to in their faith traditions is the idea of holy habits. And I think this is why young people today, kind of switching to talk about young people for a little bit, I think one reason where young people today seek out so much for is because the world is changing so quickly and they are worried about how many likes might be on their feed, or they're concerned about what other people may see of them. They're trying to look for something that is solid, something to ground themselves. And the word that came to the phrase that came to mind for me is the idea that religious traditions, but not just religious traditions, other belief systems, the main thing is helping ground you in creating holy habits. That's the phrase that came to mind for me. What is a holy habit? For me, I see a holy habit as something that you have ritualized in your life that gives you grounding and meaning. So, for example, for me, I often will wake up and the first thing I do when I try and get downstairs is pray. But I also try and take time to study scripture. And then there's other times in the day where I personally have tried to pray during the middle of the day. And that splits up this routinized secular routine into something, a touch point of something that seems to ground me and make me feel a little bit more in tune. And then at night, I try and record what I thought happened that was meaningful today. So for me, throughout my day, I try and find things that I call holy habits. Because I continue to do them, they ground me in what I think helps me capture what I can be going forward in a trajectory to help improve myself and the world. And other people also benefit from being able to have those kind of touch points. If you talk to people I've had on the podcast before who are Muslim, the five prayers that you do in Islam every day, the whole purpose is to get you in a space where you connect again with the divine. You're stepping away from things. If it's others who, for them, it's singing songs, some, either spiritual songs or maybe from a tradition where that's really important. That's a way to ground you back into the rhythm of life that matters to you. And I think that's what young people are striving for. That hunger is that grounding of what holy habits and things like it can cultivate.
I think you said two really, really important things. And let's break it apart. One is the holy habits, and then one is one specific holy habit that you have of recording what happened. So let's look at the holy habits. I know a man in my community who recently moved and went to the other side of the world. When he announced that he had to move, everybody in the community was upset. They said, how can we live without this guy? He's the one that comes first. He gets the doors open. He greets every new stranger that comes. He's the one. And they went on and on and on of this enormous positive impact this man had. He shows love to everyone in terms of positive energy. Now, what none of those people know is that this man comes from a family of depressed people. Everybody in his family is depressed. He says, when I wake up in the morning, I always feel like mud. I feel like I'm in mud. I'm depressed. So he comes from a family where depression's common. He himself is depressed. But this man has 7 what you would call holy habits. He has the ones you mentioned. He runs. The list goes on. Every single day, with enormous discipline, he applies those 7 holy habits, right, that belong to him. The result is he lifts himself up out of that depression. He lives all day long a life where he's giving positive energy to others. Most people would say, this is impossible. This story cannot be true. Some psychiatrists would say, that's a dangerous story. You can only fix people by giving them chemicals. But this guy does it, right? So the only point I'll make about that story is holy habits have real results, right? They really make a difference. Now, what you added that I think is crucial is at night, you sit down and you say, okay, what happened today? And you record your experiences. Now, research says that one of the major differentiators in the quality of life is whether or not a person learns from experience. There was a famous organizer who said, most people have experiences, but most people don't learn from their experiences. the experiences are basically going to waste. Now, we know of a tradition that says, all these things shall give thee experience. In other words, experiences are incredibly valuable, but not if you treat them like they're worthless, right? And most people have their experiences and then they just let them go. But you have a strange habit. You take your experiences and you analyze them. Now, you're analyzing them against something. The thing you're analyzing them against is your sense of purpose. People who analyze, who have positive habits, are creating more love. My friend creates love, positive energy. If you're having more high quality experiences because of positive habits, those experiences exist. If you now carefully examine those experiences, you're doing something no one does, very few people do. You're learning from excellence. You're not learning from convention. I have 1,000 common conversations. I don't learn much from those 1,000 conversations. I have one great conversation, and the learning is extreme. If, in fact, I have positive habits, the quality of my life is better because I have more cycles. Now, I still suffer. I still have bad things happen to me. But those cycles have low ends and high ends. And at the high ends, if I have positive habits, I have more moments of excellence. If I reflect on my moments of excellence, I'm learning from excellence. I'm learning and creating a theory that most people don't have. If I'm full of fear, full of anger, full of bitterness, I'm not having very many high quality experiences. If I manage those through holy habits, then I am having the experiences, and I can learn from something other people can't learn because they're not having it. So, what does religion do for you? Or let's call it principles of spirituality. What does it do for you? You behave differently than the norm. You're a positive deviant. You're implementing holy practices. The holy practices are changing the quality of your daily experience. If you then add reflection, wow, now you're learning from excellence. You're accelerating the rate of learning about excellence. You acquire the capacity to create excellence. If I'm walking down the beach, greeting everybody with high energy, that's a top of the cycle experience. If I now reflect on that and say, wow, I got payoffs from that, they got payoffs from that, maybe tomorrow I could do that again without the prompting that brought it today. All of a sudden, there's a hypothesis in my mind about how to get more excellent, how to be operating at a higher level. So the people who have the holy habits, if in fact they're also reflecting on them, are accelerating their own learning paths in this life and putting themselves into a different kind of life experience.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think what's neat for us is in our faith tradition this week, or in this past week, we have focused a lot on studying the life of a prophet named Enoch. And what's interesting about in our faith tradition about the story of this prophet named Enoch is that he goes from somebody who seems like he's wandering the land, and once he has some kind of call from God, from the divine, and he responds positively to it, his life isn't the same. And he goes through this whole experience where he goes from experiencing the divine to feeling this increase of worth, and then goes on to do things that seem unnatural to those around him. He ends up being called by other people, this is a wild man that's come among us. This person is different. Why does he act so different? And because this man, this prophet Enoch, continued to exude this type of positive energy, he ended up finding ways to do enough of those conversations with other people that he creates a whole community, which we would call Zion. And this city ends up in our faith tradition, because they have become so connected this group and so willing to reach out, they all get taken up to heaven together. And so whether people believe in that story or not, it's not my point right now. My point is the story teaches some really deep principles about why belief matters, because it's not just about yourself. It's how what you do now affects the world around you. And as you engage in positive conversations, there's a whole nother infinite universe that comes available to you than if you just continue in a conventional way of choosing to interact with other people.
When the way we interact, for the most part, reproduces the culture we're already in. That is, a culture is a set of expectations, norms, contracts, rules for behavior. They exist in every human group. In companies, that culture is incredibly powerful, for example, and it causes people to behave in conventional ways. In the average meeting, in the average company, people go to the meeting and they fold their arms.
Yeah, I've been in some of those meetings.
Yes, you have. Yes, you have. You can't be in a big organization and not go to this meeting, right? Why are people's arms folded? Well, they're folded because they're protecting themselves. Why do they protect themselves? Because they're afraid. Why are they afraid? Because the people on the other side of the table are from a different function. We're from sales. You're from operations. We're from silos, right? And we know we can't trust the people on the other silo because they have a different interest than we do. And they undermine us and we undermine them. Now, what's the cost of the folded arms? Millions and millions and millions of dollars every single year are going out the window because the arms are folded, because the people live in conflict and they don't know how to transform the conflict into collaboration. So most human groups are at a very low level of collaboration. They have a culture that reinforces that. Everybody, why wouldn't someone fix this? Why wouldn't someone become Enoch? Well, because they don't know how. They don't know how to change a culture. Because changing a culture means you have to become a positive deviant. You have to violate the culture. Now, normally we think of violating the culture, deviating as a negative thing. Oh, you're blowing up the machines. Well, there's another kind of deviance. It's called positive deviance, where we depart from the norm in an honorable way. Enoch was departing from the norm. The reason they saw him as a wild man is he was doing strange things. The strange things weren't negative things, they were positive things. What does a leader do as opposed to a manager? Most executives are not leaders, they're managers. There's a handful of executives that pop up every now and then who, in fact, are leaders. What are they doing? They're moving from authority to inspiration. They're seeing people as people. They're seeing purpose. They're pursuing the purpose. They're making it possible for people to learn and grow, to embrace a future. People begin to trust. They begin to unify. Then they begin to learn together. They become a Zion organization, whether they're at work or church, wherever they are, because the phenomenon holds. We have the research that shows those characteristics, that leadership produces high-performing teams. Management does not. Most teams and groups and organizations are not high-performing. They're low-performing. When we go to this meeting, that's a low-performing group. That's the average group. Also, think about Enoch. What I think is really important about the story of Enoch is when he gets called, his response is, "Oh, not me. I'm slow of speech. I'm not good enough, right? I'm weak. Go find someone who can lead." Now, in that story, the Lord puts has him put mud on his eyes and wash it off. When he washes the mud off his eyes, the scales fall off his eyes. And suddenly he can see differently. And when he sees differently, he begins to behave differently. He starts to lead. very few people see differently. Very few people have eyes to see because the culture locks them in and blinds them to only see the short-term realities. Sales hates production. Therefore, we're in conflict. Nothing we can do. And so this notion of me changing, me taking the risks to lead, and then having people follow me towards a better common good, when that happens, what we experience is social excellence, just like excellence of coming from those heavenly practices as an individual. Now we can learn from excellence. We can feed the cycle of excellence. You don't see that in many human gatherings. You do see it every now and then in some human gatherings.
Coming up in this episode of Interfaith Conversations.
Finding purpose is really crucial. Working to find purpose is work, but everybody can do it.